And welcome back to the show. Community Voices Heard is a not-for-profit organization principally comprised of women of color and low-income families. Now, CVH tackles some tough issues and builds power to secure racial, social, and economic justice for all New Yorkers. Now, through grassroots organizing, leadership development, policy changes, and creating new models of direct democracy, CVH has evolved into an organization that is working and strengthening the power of civic engagement of people of color. We're pleased to be joined on the show right now by the Executive Director of Community Voices Heard, Juanita Lewis. And Juanita, glad to have you here with us.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, and so thank you for the work that you do. And for those people who really don't know, I gave a little bit of an intro, but really you talk about women of color and low-income families. That's pretty much a lot of the makeup of those who are a part of your organization, and an opportunity to really have some great social impact. So talk to us about a little bit about the mission of your organization.
Yeah, so thanks again for the opportunity to be here. So Community Voices Heard is almost a 28-year-old community organization that's been in New York State. And, you know, we have 4 chapters across New York State, one in New York City, Yonkers, Newburgh, and Poughkeepsie. And, you know, our mission is pretty simple. We're about lifting up the voices of those who are impacted by, you know, unjust policies around housing, employment, and access to voting. And, you know, in the work that we've been doing over this time, it's really about how do we move from individual change into making collective change. So, you know, organizers go out and meet community members, you know, in public housing sites, in other apartments, community meetings, what have you, and ask the simple questions of, you know, what do you want to see changed in your communities? You know, are you happy with some of the conditions here? What would you like to see more of? Who do you think has the power to make those changes? And then we're able to move people into meetings to talk about what those would look like. It could be as simple as, or not as simple as, you know, wanting to make sure that we have better access to housing when it comes to, you know, affordability, or to make sure that a landlord is making the repairs in an apartment building so residents can live in safe conditions, or making sure that we have equitable development, right? As we know, as development's been happening across the state, it's oftentimes communities like ours are left out of the process. And so CVH is there, that's made up of members and leaders that want to take those issues on head on and talk to those in power, make the impact, or make those changes, because they're the ones who are directly impacted by what's happening.
And when you talk about what's directly happening right now, we know that affordable housing is a big issue. The incoming mayor, Eric Adams, says that he's got to really be able to tackle this issue. He says he has a plan to be able to address affordable housing. But talk to us about, from your perspective, how do you view affordable housing, and what are some of the housing issues that you would like to see better addressed in this upcoming year?
Yeah. So the first piece is when we talk about affordability, we're talking about affordability for whom? You know, a lot of our members are in a range of income. We're talking about those that are on public assistance making, you know, probably $15,000, all the way up to, you know, families that might be making $80,000, but that's just barely scraping by because of, you know, other expenses that they may have. You know, some of our members are students, right? So they have student loan debt. And so, you know, that money isn't stretching as far as it could be, or childcare, right? Like all the expenses that would take into account around affordability. And so there needs to be some real conversation about what income levels are we talking about? And are they broad enough, right? Or I should say more inclusive enough to think about people that meet all the different spectrums, all the way from that person that is in school wanting to be able to live on their own to, you know, the working family that are frankly being priced out of New York City. And then, you know, a lot of the issues that we also see around housing are conditions, you know, making sure that repairs are being done, and making sure that landlords are taking responsibility for making sure that families are living in safe conditions, making sure that there's adequate heat, that you know, if there's issues of mold or rodents that they're really addressing that, because we see when those things are neglected, it's part of a larger problem. It's really about a problem around disinvestment and who's worthy of access. And we are saying that we're all worthy of having safe, decent, affordable housing, but we need to be a part of that conversation.
Yeah. I want to shift gears for a moment and have an opportunity to talk about something that a lot of New Yorkers are really dealing with. That's the issue of public transportation. We know that millions of New Yorkers hit these city buses and trains trying to get from work, home, socialize, and the whole 9 yards. But yet and still, a lot of issues still remain in the area of public transportation. How do you view public transportation, and what would you like to have addressed?
Yeah, I mean, we definitely want to start looking at where lines are happening, right? How often are buses running? Are they running on time? Are there enough time options for people that work different shifts? There's always been conversation about the cost of a Metro card, right? And making sure that that is that it's affordable for those that need to use it. And I think also connected to the part where we're just talking about housing is that housing needs to be built and transportation needs to be thought about. So you don't want to have any type of housing that's built so far out that someone can't get to work. So transportation has to be a part of that conversation. And again, it's usually our communities that are left out of those conversations because we usually don't have enough bus routes, right? Or the train stop is too far away for us to be able to access it. So, I mean, it's really about being able to be a part of those conversations and seeing, more bus lines, affordability around the Metro cards, and making sure that the trains are running on time and the conditions are good so people can get to where they need to go.
Yeah. And as we look right now, we talk about accessibility. We know that so many people, I remember Co-op City in New York and the Bronx has been a real target of talking about accessibility, trying to see improved bus lines, improved traffic, improving the traffic corridor. When we look at public transportation right now, we see riders who are still struggling in terms of having to wait such a long time, whether it's for a bus or a train. A lot of questions are asked as to, is it based on economics? Is it based on the community that you live in? And I would ask you that question. How do you find the issue of public transportation? Does it go along racial lines? Does it go along, economic lines? How do you find that?
Yeah, it's interesting. So we started having some more conversations with our members about transportation through our Follow Black Women survey, where we're surveying, 5,000 Black women across New York State, and transportation has been coming up a little bit more, right? And it actually cuts across both of the things that you mentioned. Definitely income, because we're seeing the neighborhoods and where the bus lines are, or they might not be, or the access to the trains, which at times happen to also cut racially. And so, we're definitely digging more into that in terms of like what our response could be around that. Definitely wanting to have more community meetings around equitable development with a transportation focus, about who gets where they need to go and why are there barriers, and what needs to be improved, and being able to put that as part of our overall agenda around improving the lives of low-income working class families, because transportation is critical to be able to get to work and get to school, right? You want a house that is within wherever you need to go. And so it's just really deepening some of those conversations and making sure that all people who are impacted are part of that conversation, all the way from government officials to riders, right? To the users of the transportation.
Mm-hmm. And Juanita, I know that your organization predominantly, has a lot of women of color at the forefront of of the work that you do. When we talk about women of color, there is still this income disparity that women have to deal with. How do you address that issue, particularly given the fact that we know that when it comes to the issue of pay equity, that gender discrimination is real, and then when you talk about gender discrimination, you have to say for Black women and women of color, that number goes to an even lesser number. So talk to me about how you address that and what your women are talking about.
Yeah. I mean, it's starting to come up a little bit as well, right? And again, going back to our survey, when we're talking about economic justice and what does that look like? So, I mean, the conversation definitely starts with when jobs are, when there's access to jobs, let's talk about the wages, right? So there's a first step around making sure that wages are beyond living wages, right? Because there have been study after studies that show that the average New Yorker has to work at least 3 jobs, right, to be able to pay rent. And we're talking about just to pay rent and possibly making 40 something dollars an hour, right? And that doesn't take into account gender or race. And so when we're having those conversations with those particular policies, we have to have an equity lens, a racial equity lens with that, and saying, well, when you're talking about 40, you're $40, like $40 an hour, you're basing that off of this category of people. When in reality, if you're talking about Black women, Latinas, what have you, there's another level that's there, and we don't meet that 40. So that means like we need to be able to meet that and go beyond that, because we've had decades long of history of disparity. And so without having that real conversation about the money is not the same when it's first being offered, because you're only looking at it through one lens, being able to layer on the racial and gender piece.
Yeah. And so how do you go about developing your base, and how do women get in contact and become a part of your organization?
Yeah. So like I said before, we do a lot of door knocking across our 4 chapters across the state and in New York City and the 5 boroughs. You definitely, as we're going around doing our Follow Black Women survey, is a great opportunity for those who identify as Black women to fill it out, and also just come to our website. And it's www.cvhaction.org. And it has a lovely tabs about how to get involved, find out like the latest campaign work that we're doing, and then just contact information for one of us to follow up with you and get engaged in the work. Because this year is going to be a very busy year, and we're already planning for our door knocking and base building campaign and the work we're going to be doing around the gubernatorial races with our sister org CVH Power, and then just really building equitable campaigns that talk about access to housing and really starting to address what's happening in our communities around equitable development and access to voting.
Well, I want to go there because you talked a little bit about the upcoming gubernatorial races, and there are a lot of races that we need to be paying attention to. We just got finished, and we do have a new mayor, new city councils, new borough presidents across the city, and so a lot of people taking office. We've also got the midterm election that's coming right across our desk in a few minutes. Let's talk about that for a minute, because you are doing some things in terms of voter education as well as awareness. So share with us a little bit about the efforts that you're making in terms of getting people aware on the political front in terms of voting and getting them connected to getting to the polls.
Great. Yeah. So, last year we did a lot of work in the city council races and the mayoral races to get people out to vote, particularly Black women, because Black women are the highest when it comes to voter registration rate, but the least engaged. And so we definitely wanted to go after Black women and cross in the different boroughs and have a conversation with them about the elections and what was happening. And so now we're going to be following up with them over the next few months and engaging interest in terms of different issues of importance to them, and then connecting that to the elections. And so we're going to be having a series of, why does voting matter in our community town halls, making sure we're getting people registered, really having people have relationships with each other through this process of civic engagement. Because we know, in particular, when Black women come out to vote, everybody in the family votes, right? And their organizations vote, and everyone just comes around. And we vote based off of particular things that we're being impacted by. And so being able to connect that to the town halls that I mentioned around like voter education, opportunities to go out and do some get out the vote, door knocking and phone calling and texting, and then, basic civics 101. How do all these structures work, and how do the structures that are there impact my day-to-day life?
Right. And so talking about impact, I want to go there, talk about how COVID has actually impacted the work of your organization, and also how have you had to make adjustments due to the COVID pandemic?
Yeah, no, I mean, we definitely had to adjust when everything started in 2020. We are a group that believes in getting out there, knocking on doors, and being out in the community. And we had to quickly pivot. And we were able to secure tablets and hotspots to give to our members so they were able to keep in contact with loved ones and with us as we were doing different campaign meetings. Last year we were still knocking on doors to make sure tenants knew about the emergency rental assistance program and to register for that, and also get them activated to push Governor Hochul when she first came in to extend the eviction moratorium. And so, we took all the precautions to do that. And then also we were knocking on doors to get people elected last year. But we also had the virtual component, right? A lot of our Follow Black Women events were held virtually. We had a big mayoral forum with over 500 predominantly Black women across New York City that were on Zoom, right? And then there were people who said, yes, I want to go knock on doors. And so we were still doing what we're known for, but adding in the virtual component and using a lot more of texting and e-blast to keep people up to date on what we were doing, and doing mutual aid, right? Which is something that we haven't done before, right? Making sure that food was delivered to our members and other tenants in public housing, that we were supporting Black businesses, Black and brown businesses at this time when they were hardest hit.
Yeah. And so as we look at 2022, what are some of your goals and your initiatives?
Yeah, so a couple of the big ones, right, is to continue doing our Follow Black Women survey. We're almost at, I want to say, about 2,000 surveys collected, and we have a goal of collecting 5,000, so 3,000 more. And so making sure that we get those surveys done, and that we are also, getting ready for our big, as we call, like, base building campaign, our big door knocking blitz of going back and reaching out to the people that we met last year during our elections and getting them engaged in deeper campaign work that we're doing. And we're also developing an interesting campaign around tenant control and equitable development. A lot of the things that we see happening in housing, and particularly in apartments, is that owners own everything and tenants have some rights and don't have full ownership over where they live. And so being able to develop an idea of what does it mean to have some real tenant control, particularly in NYCHA, is something that we're excited about exploring, and making sure with the equitable development that we're taking everything into account when it comes to race and income, particularly with the federal funding that's been coming down through the infrastructure bill and what have you, making sure that we're getting that in our communities and the money's being spent the way it needs to. And then all of that, making sure people come out and vote this year for these important races.
Yeah. Our previous guest, Ramona, was sharing a little bit. We talked about the fire in the Bronx and how it really has impacted NYCHA, given the fact that it's highlighted so many of the things that need to be done, or whether it's an improvement in heat, water, and even we talked about the emotional instability that's caused after having to go back home after experiencing such a tragic event. Give me a little bit about, the women of color and the work that you're doing with NYCHA, and have you been, have you had similar situations where you really had to ring their doorbell a lot?
Yeah, no, I mean, the heat situation completely, right? It wasn't that long ago. It's probably like a couple of Thanksgivings ago, this last Thanksgiving and a couple before that, where thousands of tenants lost heat, right? And we already knew that there was an issue with boilers, but that comes down to the lack of investment of the funding that has been distributed to make sure those boilers were replaced, and that there was adequate investment made in NYCHA. And a lot of our members that are in public housing, majority of them are women of color. And so, clearly everything that happened in the Bronx was just heartbreaking, because unfortunately that is not a new story, right? Of people trying to figure out, how am I going to keep warm when the building owners, the managers, or the building is not providing what it's supposed to provide. And so, in this moment, we've definitely been checking in with our members across the Bronx, making sure that they have adequate heat, right? If they don't, I know there's going to be some upcoming meetings with NYCHA residents, and also, member tenants in private developments, about how there's a whole story around making sure that there's safe conditions for people, making sure that there's heat and extra hot water and all of that, and doing an analysis of who's got the power. So in NYCHA, we're clear about who has the power, and we're clear about the money that has been distributed but hasn't made to, or put it this way, that there's been access to, but has not been used the way it should be used, which has been an ongoing concern, right? So we're just going to be bringing folks together to hear those stories and highlight that, and then start having some very important conversations in the coming months.
So how do people get in touch with your organization if you have, somebody out there saying, listen, you know what, I like the work that you're doing, I like the initiatives and the advocacy that you're providing. How could I be a part?
So it is pretty simple to be a part of us. So again, just going to our website at www.cvhaction.org, and then just click on where it says like get involved, and you fill out a quick member form for us, and one of our staff people will follow up with you.
Awesome. And as we look towards 2022, obviously, we know that there are a lot of challenges out there that we're trying to tackle and overcome. Just give us, for a few seconds, a little bit about your organization and how you've been able to overcome. You talked about overcoming COVID, and this has been a 2-year process. What has been the strength and resilience of being able to keep women connected and those that you serve connected during a time like this?
What our biggest thing was when we were doing our virtual town halls. When we did a couple of our Follow Black Women town halls, the first one was literally called "Sis, Are You Okay?" And we had over 50 women on there of all different ages, ethnicities as it comes to Black, gender expressions, what have you. And everyone just kept talking about how they needed this connection, right? Just to be able to talk to other women and to know like, okay, it's not just me that's going through this, we're all going through this. And they found support through that. And so it's been those moments of those town halls when we were finally able to have our membership appreciation barbecue in August, right? Just being able to see people and for those who wanted to hug people and just be around each other. And it's just the constant checking in with each other, right? Just to make sure that everyone's okay. So that's just been the resilience and the blessing of the members of this organization.
What were the takeaways? I mean, you have these conversations and checking in. Were there any themes that you could say Lee ran through that you could say, listen, we really need to look at this because a lot of people are dealing with this?
Mental health, definitely.
Yeah.
The piece around mental health and also around access to technology and the lack of it in our communities. Those definitely were the two biggest things. And we knew healthcare was there, but we heard more and more around mental health and technology during this time.
Yeah, it's a great divide. When we were talking about technology, so many people with a lack of access, and you would think that in a Wi-Fi generation that everybody has access to internet, and that's not so, or the access to be able to, have some sort of device that can connect you to Zoom or that. But it seems as though with COVID-19, it just came whooshing in, and there's so many people who knew I'm not ready for this because I just don't even have the basics.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, it was heartbreaking, right? There were just so many times, when we would have calls on Zoom, I would see somebody's face and it would just freeze, and then they would just disappear. And then you call and ask what happened, they would say I lost connection, right? And so if this is the way that we have to communicate, at that point, we didn't know how long, and it's not accessible and it's not stable. How are we supposed to see people? How are we supposed to keep in contact? So it also just highlighted when homeschooling needed to happen and everything was remote and everything's online. If you're unable to connect or even have access to, a laptop, a tablet or what have you, how are you supposed to go to school? So it just exacerbated things that we already know were happening. And so the situation definitely highlighted more the need around technology access and the divide that's out there.
Yeah. It's amazing the technology divide that continues to exist. Even for young people, we talked to parents, and we've also talked to educators who said, listen, one of the greatest struggles is even though we went to remote learning, a lot of kids, even though there were educational institutions, public schools giving out this, tablets and information, but there were still a lot of people who didn't have, or they had faulty devices, and it created such a challenge within, a challenge within the learning curve. And I know I've heard a lot of mothers say, you know, that this is a piece that I need in order to make my, in order to allow my children the best possible way to go forward.
Yeah. No, it's hard. And I mean, I know that's definitely been talked about even more at the state level when it comes to funding and education funding and access, the piece now around technology. And I think it's gonna come up even more now, right? And more people are paying attention to it. We see how federal spending now is including technology and access to broadband and access to tablets, and or at least equipment for those things. So we're just going to see that conversation. But this goes back to when we're talking about communities being impacted and of all the things, technology was never the part of the conversation until a crisis happened, right? And so now it's forcing the conversation to happen. And it's an opportunity for our communities to speak up more about what this means for us.
Yeah. Well, we're going to continue to, speak up. We're going to continue to have our voices heard. And thank you for raising the voice on so many of a variety of issues and the work that you guys are doing, you ladies, I should say, are doing and really making a difference and really transforming lives through your advocacy and your impact. So great to have you, Juanita, be with us.
Thank you so much. I appreciate the opportunity. I love having these kind of conversations.
Yeah, got to have you back. Of course, we'd love to do that.